Now, on China, carbon neutrality was a concept developed back more than 1.5 years ago, and it's evolving rapidly. The central government is working on what they call 1+N strategy, which means that in all major sectors, including energy, transportation, building, manufacturing, they need to have a roadmap towards carbon neutrality. And also, the finance sector has taken fairly aggressive measures to help finance the carbon neutrality agenda. In fact, the China's Green Finance initiative was launched a long time ago. When I was the chief economist at PBOC, as early as in 2014, we began to develop a framework. At that time, the Green Finance agenda was largely serving the purpose of dealing with air pollution, water pollution, land contamination. But over time, we're now seeing a major shift towards a focus on the green financing. Last year, the banking sector in China, which provided 16 trillion RMB worth of green loans, has shown a number which is nearly 70% of the new green loans resulted in carbon reduction. So actually, the main purpose of green financing now in China is for carbon neutrality. Of course, the rest may also help on pollution prevention, biodiversity, and so on and so forth. Now, just a few key elements of the Chinese green financial system to share with you. One is the standards, namely the taxonomy. We started working on the standards as early as in 2013, when the banking regulator in China published the first green lending taxonomy. I think that was the first one officially in the world. And in 2015, the Green Finance Committee, which I chaired, published the first green bond taxonomy in China. And then 2019, the NDRC led a group of other ministries publishing the green project taxonomy, which is now becoming the basis for all other major taxonomies in China. So within China, we have a system of taxonomies defining what is green. And this provides an important basis for preventing greenwashing, for disclosure, for allocating incentive, and for developing products. The second key element of the green financial system is disclosure. We want to make sure that the environmental benefits of these green projects are properly measured, properly disclosed, so that the investors can find the right green projects to support. And over time, the disclosure system also evolved. Initially, back 5-6 years ago, the Ministry of Environment required all major polluters to disclose on a mandatory basis the environmental impact information. For example, how much carbon emission you generated, how much air pollutants, how much water you have polluted, that kind of information, which was a mandatory requirement for roughly 20% of listed companies, which are classified as major polluters. Of course, the other major polluters, unlisted, are also required to do so. And last year, the CSRC, which is security regulator, began to require ESG disclosure. But still, it's a framework without specific templates and indicators, mandatory requirements. They're going to work on that in the future. And the PBOC last year also issued a guideline on financial institutions environmental information disclosure, which look very similar like TCFD, which means that the banks and other financial firms will have to disclose strategy, targets, green financial products, as well as the indicators of environmental benefits and impacts. But again, the specific indicators are still being worked on. The pilot on environmental risk analysis, environmental information disclosure launched by the China-UK task force, which I co-chair, is now helping the PBOC to work on the specific templates. So going forward, we're going to build on ISSB, which is a new international organization that will develop a internationally consistent set of standards and combine with Chinese specific conditions to develop the actual templates for financial firms to disclose environmental climate information. In terms of incentives, which is the third building block, that's a very important one in China. At the central bank level, just give you one example of the PBOC introducing what I call decarbonization facility last year. And this facility offers low-cost funding through commercial banks to decarbonization projects, such as renewable, industrial decarbonization, and the CCUS, and so on. at a funding cost of 1.7% annual rate, which is very, very cheap. I think it's more than 2 percentage points lower than market. So that provides a important incentive for banks and project owners to take up these projects. At the local level, a lot of what we call pilot regions for green finance have introduced interest subsidies and the guarantees for green projects. For example, Huzhou, by offering such incentives, were able to grow their green loans at a pace of 40% per year in the past few years, and they're still keeping non-performing loan ratio at below 0.4%. So it's a very successful way of applying limited amount of fiscal resource, but generating a lot of private sector investments into the green sector. The fourth element of the green financial system is what we call risk analysis. Again, last year, the central bank required 20-something larger banks to conduct a climate risk analysis, which is the sort of stress testing concept. And these banks were asked to stress test on the potential increase of carbon price going forward. What if carbon price goes up by 3 times, 5 times, 10 times, and how it's going to affect the asset quality of these banks in terms of lending to coal-fired power generation, to steel, to cement, these carbon-intensive sectors. And the overall result is that because exposure is relatively small in large banks, the impact is relatively manageable. But I think the methodology still needs to be improved, because these companies are not only facing the carbon price shock, but also many, many other shocks. In the longer term, I believe that demand is going to contract if they continue to produce carbon-intensive products, and the competitiveness will go down because, as Dr. Peng says, the green premium is going to go down, and the greener products will become cheaper and more competitive. So if you combine all of these in a more sort of extended version of stress testing, then the stress will be bigger than the current results. And I do know that the central bank is now refining their methodology for environmental stress testing for the banks, and will introduce more methodology in line with the NGFS recommendation in terms of scenario setting and so on. And the final element I'd like to mention in the Chinese green financial system is products. As I said, we now have the largest green lending market in the world at an outstanding amount of 16 trillion RMB. And we have the second largest green bond market with over 2 trillion RMB worth of green bonds issued the last 6 years. And many other new products popping up, like green ABS, green ETF, carbon-related products, and so on and so forth. The most important thing is that the growth rate is massive. Last year, our green lending grew by 33%, and our green bond issuance went up by 170%. And the momentum remained very, very strong. Given the forecast from Green Finance Committee in China, looking at 487 trillion RMB worth of green investment demand in the coming 30 years. So I think green loan, green bonds, and every other green financial products are going to grow at a much faster pace than GDP in the coming decades and even longer. That's why I think not only the Chinese finances, but also global finances should be interested in participating in this very strong trend of decarbonization within China.